Today we're taking a deep look at one of the most important and fragile developments in the Middle East right now, the ceasefire in Syria. After years of devastating conflict, any pause in fighting brings hope. But the big question is whether the ceasefire can actually survive, or if it's just another temporary break before violence resumes. To understand the risks, we first need to remember how complex the Syrian conflict really is. This is not a simple two-sided war. It involves the Syrian government, a wide range of opposition groups, Kurdish forces, extremist organizations, and multiple foreign powers. Each of these actors has its own goals, alliances, and red lines. A ceasefire in such an environment is incredibly hard to maintain because one small incident can quickly spiral into wider clashes. One major risk comes from the lack of trust between the main parties. Years of broken deals and failed truces have left deep scars. When one side accuses the other of violating the ceasefire, even in a minor way, retaliation often follows. This creates a cycle where each side claims self-defense, but the result is a steady erosion of the agreement. Without strong trust-building measures, the ceasefire rests on very shaky ground. Another critical issue is the presence of extremist groups that are not part of the ceasefire agreement. Organizations like ISIS remnants and other hardline factions operate in various parts of Syria. These groups have no interest in peace talks or political solutions. They can launch attacks that provoke responses from government or opposition forces, which then blame each other and escalate fighting. Even if the main signatories want peace, these spoilers can easily derail the process. Foreign involvement is another huge factor that puts the ceasefire at risk. Syria has become a battleground for regional and global powers, including Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the United States. Each of these countries supports different local forces and pursues its own strategic interests. If tensions rise between any of these external actors, it can quickly translate into renewed fighting on the ground. A ceasefire that depends on fragile international cooperation is always vulnerable to sudden political shifts. Territorial disputes also play a major role in threatening the truce. Certain in Syria remain highly contested, especially in the north and northwest. Control over roads, border crossings, and resource-rich areas like oil fields is a constant source of tension. When forces move to strengthen their positions in these sensitive zones, even if they claim it's for defensive reasons, it can be seen as a provocation by others. This makes localized clashes almost inevitable. Humanitarian conditions add another layer of pressure. Millions of Syrians are still displaced, and many areas face severe shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. If the ceasefire does not lead to quick improvements in daily life, frustration among civilians can grow. Protests, unrest, or attempts by desperate families to cross front lines in search of aid can create flashpoints that spark new violence. Political negotiations are also a weak link. The ceasefire is supposed to create space for talks about Syria's future, including constitutional reforms but progress on these issues has been painfully slow. When political dialogue stalls, armed groups often lose patience and return to military options. Without visible political gains, the ceasefire risks being seen as meaningless by those who are still suffering. Another danger comes from within each side. The Syrian government camp is not monolithic, and neither is the opposition. Different factions have different priorities, leadership struggles, and levels of discipline. Even if top leaders agree to a ceasefire, commanders on the ground might not fully comply. Rogue units or splinter groups can break the truce and drag everyone else back into conflict. Economic pressures are also a silent but powerful threat. Syria's economy is in ruins, with massive inflation, unemployment, and a collapsed currency. Armed groups often rely on smuggling, checkpoints, and control of resources to survive financially. A sustained ceasefire can disrupt these income streams, giving some factions a financial incentive to restart fighting. When peace threatens profits, spoilers become more active. The role of monitoring and enforcement is another key risk area. A ceasefire is only as strong as the mechanisms that support it. If there are not enough neutral observers on the ground, or if they lack real authority, violations can go unpunished. This sends a message that breaking the rules has no consequences. Over time, this weakens the entire agreement and encourages more violations. Communication breakdowns can also be deadly. In a crowded battlefield like Syria, misunderstandings are common. A routine troop movement or a defensive patrol can be misinterpreted as an attack preparation. Without reliable hotlines and coordination channels between rival forces, these misunderstandings can quickly turn into gunfire, even if no one intended to break the ceasefire. Another major risk is the unresolved Kurdish issue. Kurdish-led forces control large parts of northeastern Syria, and their relationship with both the Syrian government and Turkey is extremely tense. Turkey views some Kurdish groups as a direct security threat and has carried out multiple cross-border operations. Any new Turkish military action or clash involving Kurdish forces could easily blow up the ceasefire, even in areas far from the original front lines. Refugee returns are another sensitive topic. Millions of Syrians are living as refugees in neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Some governments are pushing for their return, but many refugees fear arrest, conscription, or if they go back. If large numbers of people are forced or pressured to return before conditions are truly safe, it could lead to new unrest and violence, further destabilizing the ceasefire. The question of justice and accountability also hangs over the peace process. Many Syrians want answers for years of war crimes, disappearances, and destruction. If the ceasefire leads to a political deal that ignores these, resentment could grow. Victims and their families may feel betrayed, and some groups could decide that returning to arms is the only way to seek justice. Regional tensions beyond Syria's borders can also have a direct impact. Conflicts or crises in places like Gaza, Lebanon, or Ukraine can shift the priorities of major powers involved in Syria. If attention and resources are diverted elsewhere, the international pressure needed to sustain the Syrian ceasefire may weaken. This creates an opportunity for local actors to test the limits and push their military agendas. Another often overlooked risk is the environmental and infrastructure damage left by years of war. Many cities lack basic services like electricity, clean water, and functioning hospitals. If reconstruction does not begin soon, daily life will remain unbearable for many civilians. This can create a breeding ground for crime, radicalization, and renewed conflict, all of which undermine the ceasefire. The media and information war also plays a role. False reports, propaganda, and rumors can inflame tensions and spread. If people believe that the other side is preparing for war or committing atrocities, even without evidence, pressure builds to strike first. In a fragile ceasefire environment, perception can be just as dangerous as reality. Leadership changes could also shake things up. If key political or military leaders on any side are replaced, killed, or weakened, their successors may not feel bound by previous agreements. A new leader might see an opportunity to gain territory or boost popularity through renewed fighting. This uncertainty makes long-term stability very hard to achieve. One more major risk is the lack of a clear endgame. A ceasefire is not a solution by itself. It's just a pause. Without a realistic and inclusive political roadmap for Syria's future, the truce has no solid foundation. People need to know what comes next, how power will be shared, and how rights will be protected. Without answers, the temptation to return to violence remains strong. Despite all these risks, it's important to note that the ceasefire also represents a real opportunity. For the first time in a long while, large-scale fighting has slowed in many areas. This has allowed some humanitarian aid to reach communities and given exhausted civilians a brief sense of normal life. These small gains show that peace, even if fragile, is still possible. International diplomacy will be crucial in the coming months. Countries with influence over the warring parties need to stay actively engaged, not just issue statements. This means applying pressure when violations occur, offering incentives for compliance, and supporting serious political talks. Without sustained support, the ceasefire is unlikely to survive on its own. Local peace initiatives can also make a difference. In some towns and villages, community leaders, elders, and civil society groups have helped negotiate local truces and prevent small incidents from escalating. Strengthening these grassroots efforts could help stabilize the broader ceasefire and build trust from the bottom up. The role of the United Nations remains central. UN-led talks, monitoring missions, and humanitarian programs provide a neutral framework that many Syrians still trust more than any single foreign power. However, the UN's effectiveness depends on whether majors are willing to cooperate and compromise, rather than using Syria as a chessboard for their rivalries. Another hopeful sign is war fatigue. After more than a decade of bloodshed, many fighters and civilians alike are simply tired of. This exhaustion can be a powerful force for peace, pushing people to support the ceasefire even when tensions rise. But fatigue alone is not enough. It must be backed by real improvements in security and living conditions. Economic relief could be a game changer. If limited sanctions relief, increased aid, or small reconstruction projects are tied directly to maintaining the ceasefire, it could give all sides a practical reason to keep the peace. When people see tangible benefits from calm, they are more likely to defend it. At the same time, unrealistic expectations could become a problem. Some people might hope for immediate nationwide peace, full reconstruction, and political transformation. When these hopes are not met quickly, disappointment could turn into anger. Managing expectations and communicating honestly about what the ceasefire can and cannot achieve is essential. So, will the Syria ceasefire survive? The honest answer is that it's still very uncertain. The risks are enormous, from extremist spoilers and foreign interference to economic collapse and political deadlock. Any one of these factors could be enough to break the truce if not carefully managed. Yet, the ceasefire also offers a narrow window of opportunity. If local and international actors act wisely, build trust, improve humanitarian conditions, and push forward real political dialogue, this pause in fighting could gradually turn into something more durable. It won't be easy, and setbacks are almost guaranteed, but even imperfect peace is better than endless war. For now, the future of Syria hangs in the balance. The ceasefire is like a fragile bridge over a deep abyss. It can carry the country toward a more stable future, but only if everyone involved chooses to protect it rather than test its limits. The coming months will show whether this fragile hope can survive the many storms still ahead. Thanks for staying with me through this in-depth look. If you found this explanation helpful, make sure to share it with others who want to understand what's really at stake in Syria right now. And as always, stay informed, stay thoughtful, and I'll see you again in the next video.